Good evening, everybody. Apologies for the slightly late start. It is now 6:33. Welcome this evening to the meeting of the Scrutiny. It's Monday, the 15th December 2021. And for those listening and watching, my name is Councillor Caroline Brooke and I'm the chair of the committee. I have a few housekeeping points to make before we begin. Please can I advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and live streamed from the council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be publicly available shortly afterwards. We have a mix of in-person and online participation today. For those in the room, please can I ask that you speak clearly and remember to use microphones. And for those online, please can I ask you mute your microphones and turn off your cameras until you're needed to speak. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are on silent or switched off. Fire evacuation procedure is, as always, through the clearly marked fire exits. In case of fire, please follow any instructions given to you by the fire marshals, who will be wearing high visibility jackets. So, turning to the agenda, item 1, apologies and deputy members. Matthew, can you update us, please?
Evening, Chair. Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Weir, who's been replaced by Councillor Crummoisen this evening, and also apologies from Councillor Williams. But I'm pleased to say I can also see Councillor Williams has joined us online, but not in the room.
Thank you, Matthew. Do we have any declarations of interest this evening? That's a lumber.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just doing a call outside. Can I make the usual county council declaration in case anything relates to county council matters? Thank you.
Any other declarations? No. The only announcement I have is regarding mental health case. We'll come to that later when we talk about the forward plan. The work plan. So that brings us on to item 4, minutes of the meeting on the 9th of September 2021. Can I ask that you've all had time to look at this and commented, made any changes, and you're all happy to accept this evening? Agreed. Many thanks. Public participation. I understand that there's no public participation this evening. I can't ask Matthew. We did approach TACT, we did speak to TACT. They were unable to attend this evening, so I asked that Matthew contact them to ask if they had any statements to give to us in advance of this evening's meeting. The HRA budget was presented to the tax support group, and the majority of the group went for the rent option 2 with the 3.1% rise. So just wanted to let you know that tax have been informed, it has been discussed, and that's the feedback that gave us. So when we come to that, I shall remind you, and that brings us merrily on to item 6, the general fund budget options and medium-term financial strategy. This report was presented to Cabinet on the 20th of October and sets out a number of issues, including budget options for 22-23 budget. Whilst the detailed budget proposals will be presented to us at the meeting on the 1st of February, ahead of the Cabinet on the 17th of February, and then it will go on to the Council on the 23rd. Tonight gives us an opportunity to give its comments on the budget reports, our consultation, if you like, and comment on any other items within the report. So if we can read it in the spirit of this is our chance of being consulted, that would be incredibly helpful. So, with that in mind, does anybody have any comments on the paper itself? Are we? Apologies. Are we getting an introduction on this? Who's introducing? Councillor Cutler. Apologies, Councillor Cutler. I skipped you.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy to introduce the paper, which, as you say, has been to Cabinet and been approved by Cabinet, although the recommendations were varied from those recommendations on the original paper, which is why draft Cabinet minutes have come through to you. The main changes being resolution 9A, that there will be no increases to off-street parking charges except in Winchester's central air quality management zone. And also 9C, which changes it, other fees and charges to be subject to recommendation 7, not recommendation 6. The paper presents, as you said, anticipated changes in budget proposals to produce a balanced budget for next year, the medium-term financial strategy, which shows a forecast of a deficit of about £1 million in 23-24. And the proposal is that the transitional reserve that was created specifically for this purpose would be used to deal with that deficit, but the longer term deficits that arise, we would put in place a strategic service review to start somewhere at the beginning of, well, after the budget, in the spring, summer of this year, to address that and address the deficit and to reduce net operating costs. That will be a wide-ranging review that we can take time over rather than rush it now. I don't think I have anything else to add.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Mr. Botham, did you want to add anything before we go into the paper?
Only very briefly, Chair, just to clarify that at the time the paper was drafted, we were awaiting the spending review announcements. They have now been made, have been broadly welcomed by the sector, albeit we are as yet not in a position to assess exactly how that will impact on the City Council's budget moving forward. So we're awaiting further announcements. We're anticipating that we'll hear more on the 5th of December. And as soon as we do, then we'll obviously analyse what is stated and assess the impact that's going to have, and obviously keep members updated on it.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. Okay, so coming back to the paper. So if we start at the beginning and go up to page 26, just before we get to the, oh, sorry, Councillor Powell?
When you're ready, Chairman.
Okay, up until page 26 before we go on to the budget update 21-22. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I question the decision not to increase Sandbar charges. We're already looking at inflation at, I think, 3.2%, and it's predicted to rise to 5%. And our costs are increasing. I think we're all aware of that. I prefer to increase costs to residents that they have a choice about, rather than council tax, which they have no choice about. And I'm thinking about, in particular, parking costs outside the city centre. I think £1.50 for a whole day's parking is not appropriate and not comparable with other town centre parking. I note that the planning fees are not being increased, and neither are the fines for community nuisance. And I wonder if consideration should be given to at least increasing those in line with inflation.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Cutler, was both like to come up on this?
Yes, Chair. The detail obviously comes in the charges paper later, and so I'm not sure whether we want to discuss the detail of it now. But fundamentally, across the charges, we cannot. I think you talked about planning charges, and some of the planning charges are within building control. It was felt that we didn't have sufficient evidence that we wouldn't be making a surplus within building control, and which we are fairly constrained as to what we can do. And on parking, I think the parking really falls into the broader parking and access strategy that Council Todd is working on with the market towns. The proposal to accept the air quality management area really is because we want to make a move more quickly on that area, because there is it forms part of our policy of trying to reduce the amount of cars in the city centre. But Councillor Todd may want to add to that. And Richard may have more detail on the constraints within the fees and charges, but I'm not sure if you want to have that debate now or when we get to the fees and charge paper.
Did anybody else want to come in at that point? Mr. Fraser?
Chair, just to echo the point that I think that Councillor was making, that the report recommends and it was approved that fees and charges broadly are increased in line with inflation. So that's the broad principle that we put forward in the report, and the Cabinet supported. And obviously, I'm happy to pick up on some of those points of detail in the fees and charges paper when we get to that next one.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I welcome what I see as a reasonably prudent approach to the budgeting overall. I think that's sensible. Like Councillor Powell, I have some detailed comments on some of the fees and tariffs, which I think we'll cover up later on in the agenda. But I have a question, which is really about, I have a number of questions, but one of these is about phrasing in 2.4, page 23, where we say we're focused on changing behaviour to move users out of the city. I know exactly what that means, and it's not ambiguous to me, but in terms of the language, I would ask if my question, if you like, is can we change the wording to encourage users to park on the perimeter rather than trying to move people out of the cities? I know that's what you intend, but it's just a subtle thing. And as this is a public document, I'd rather people get the message that we're looking for people to park on the perimeter rather than could you move out of St. Cross and whatever we're thinking of. So that's just the first one.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to ask the question. And as Mr. Botham said, we're expecting the detail of the government settlement, I think, at the beginning of December, which may have a very positive impact on the financial projections. If that is to be calculated, as you indicate, at the beginning of December, are we going to get another opportunity as this committee or other committees before it progresses through to the formal budget setting to look at that impact and the benefits that that might bring to the overall budget? Will we be able to review that, and will you be updating it before it comes before us in February?
Mr. Fraser?
Chair, that may be difficult. We will obviously await the announcements in December. Whether we get the detail on the 5th remains to be seen. Sometimes it comes a bit later than that. The team will then do the work around analysing that and what the impact that has on the budget overall, and feed that into the February papers, which will come to the Scrutiny Committee before it gets to Cabinet. But it could be that early February meeting before we have the chance to formally present the options that may present. Certainly, as far as we would be able to brief members ahead of that of our analysis.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. Beg pardon. I have a further question regarding 2.7, the 17,500 to the Hampshire Cultural Trust. Will the Anglo-Saxon visitor experience be a permanent display for several years, or will it be a one-off piece?
Who can answer that one for us? Ms. Ray?
My understanding is that the proposal has a fixed life as an initial attraction, and it will be how that develops more sort of the popularity of that and the success of that initial scheme will then influence what the Hampshire Cultural Trust may wish to develop in the city moving forward.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a couple of follow-up questions to other questions that have been asked. In 2.4, we were talking about raising car park charges in the quality management zone area, and I just wondered what we're going to use that increase for, whether that is going to be directly used for measures to improve air quality in the area. My second question relates to Councillor Crowell's question on understanding the spending review early December. We talk in the paper at 6.1 about going out to public consultation on the options in November. If it does have an impact, when we know the details of the spending review on some of the options we're putting forward, are we putting one before the other? I'm slightly concerned about that. And then my third question was just a bit of clarity around the 100,000 additional funds that we're going to be making available for the climate emergency work. I understand that the money we've currently got in place, which is considerably more, is likely to run out. But I am concerned that that is only a very small amount, given the importance of that issue generally and to us as a council. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to come back on that, particularly the consultation and then getting the spending impact?
Chair, if I could pick up initially on the comments, and then members may wish to add to that. With regard to the any income that is generated from the fees and charges, at the moment the medium-term projections assume that they're contributing towards the overall position that's set out in the appendix. So there isn't any proposed additional investment within this paper on additional measures as a result of that. What does happen, of course, each year we do bring forward a parking and access strategy investment plan effectively, so that will come forward before the start of the year with proposals for how that income will be used. I'll see Councillor Todd may want to add to
that. Yes, if we are, one of the things we've highlighted is we'll be looking at the quality charging for the more polluting vehicles. That will require, that will impact the kind of machines that we're able to buy, parking machines, to replace the ones that are wearing out. So it will show up in the capital strategy as we take stronger action in tackling air quality. Plus, there is the wider support for things like bicycle parking, support for bus services and other things which we've flagged that we intend to be investing in as a consequence of the movement strategy. Sorry, the parking access strategy.
Sorry, yeah, the next question was around the spending review announcements. When I said obviously we're awaiting further announcements on the detail, and that the spending review statements were well received by the sector, we are not anticipating a fundamental change in the projections in this paper. So I think we were probably nervous before that there would be quite a high risk of a negative impact on the paper. I think we're more confident that the impact will not be a negative impact on the projections in the paper, but that remains to be seen. Anything by way of an improvement on the position that we've forecast in the paper, I think will address future deficits rather than give a significant change in the investment opportunities for the council.
I have one more about the climate emergency.
Sorry. And the investment included in the projections of the climate emergency relate to revenue feasibility investment to keep that feasibility work going on, assessment future opportunities. It isn't about then spending on specific projects. So it's considered, and that's broadly in line with what the council has been investing until now. So it's really provision to make sure we can keep that work going. Now, obviously, that feasibility work will then inform whether or not we make further proposals to the capital programme for significant investment to address carbon reduction measures.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. Councillor Hall.
Chair, this is a question for Mr. Botham and probably Councillor Cutler, is that if the deficit in the general fund budget is looming, as you indicated, why have we not taken the time to do a strategic spending review internally at this point whilst we have that opportunity, so that we can map out the future rather than just waiting for the next round and then having to gather ourselves up and understand where that might take us? I appreciate that we're all anticipating spending review will be more positive than you've anticipated, but we could have done more work over the recent past on that strategic spending review. Unless you have and we're not aware of it, just like to understand why not. Thank you.
Chair, work on addressing the budget forecasts and bringing forward and maintaining a balanced budget is ongoing. Obviously, we're working on that all the time. The last 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, have been seeing significant turmoil in our income levels and our projections and the local economy and the whole range of it. So forecasting in that climate was really challenging. As you'll see in the report, we set out quite a significant in-year variation. So we're now updating our forecasts all the time, and there's some very significant changes there. So I suppose it is around timing. You know, had we spent a lot of time undertaking the strategic review in the middle of a pandemic, then I think that the findings or the decisions made there may well be different than if we're doing them now. What we're projecting here is that we do have a period where we can present a balanced budget. We can maintain a balanced budget over the course of the next year, and we can make, and then there's sufficient money in reserves to maintain that for a further year. So we can understand, rather than just have the approach that the council has adopted in previous years, where we had an annual review trying to bring forward a balanced budget. We can bring forward a balanced budget and propose then a strategic approach to that review, which allows us to dig deep into specific services, into cabinet member areas, and to explore opportunities in a lot more detail than you can if it's in a few months leading up to trying to bring forward a balanced budget. So we're bringing forward a balanced budget. We then have the medium-term financial strategy is to take the year in much the same way as many other authorities, and I know the County Council have had their T19, T20, T22 programmes. Very similar approach to what to other authorities take at the moment, is to taking a measured approach where we can actually consult more widely, dig deeper, look at opportunities, explore alternative funding options, and then bring forward sort of a bigger range of conclusions than if we were just trying to address in the very short term and do it in time to bring forward a balanced budget.
Apologies, Councillor Cutler, did you still want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Richard has given a very measured response here. My response perhaps wouldn't have been quite so measured, in that, you know, over the last 18 months, we've had to make significant changes to the budget because of the huge variability. We've made significant savings. We've been waiting for the last 3 years for a 3-year spending review, and this year is the first time we'll get it. It is not sensible to have done any. We'll now be in the position to understand the financing from government over a longer period of time. As you can imagine, the finance team has been under a huge pressure, as has every other department within the council, during the pandemic, and it is far more sensible to sit back, wait for the dust to settle to a certain extent, to understand what the position is in terms of the spending review, to understand where the economy is going, and take the time to do a detailed spending review, which one of the things I want to make clear to the committee is that the language used suggests a spending review, and it suggests cutting net operating costs. That does actually mean finding other sources of income. It's not just about cuts of services. So it's vitally important. We created the room with the transitional reserve to be able to have the time to do this properly. And it would not have been appropriate to have started that work until next year.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Horrell, did you want to come back on that?
Could I just then ask a supplementary, given the responses from the officer and the cabinet member? Does that mean that we are committing to a strategic review in the forthcoming year? Thank you.
The paper makes it quite clear that we are committed to a strategic spending review. Yes.
Councillor Croyson.
Thank you, Chair. Referring to recommendation 6, where we're asked to approve a proposal to spend 300k on upgrading the council's IT desktop infrastructure, etc. Totally welcome that, bringing the council into the 21st century. I think that's really important. But in sort of related to that subject, I would ask, have we set aside budget and investment to address our, if you like, digital engagement platform so that we can engage with our customers out in the community, customers and stakeholders, much easier, make it easier for them to engage with the council? Have we got that set aside and planned for? And I apologise if I've missed it somewhere in the detail.
Specific proposals are yet to be brought forward on any amendments to our digital strategy, but that's being worked on currently. It would be depending on the proposals included within that, but we do have provision in the IT reserve, and it will, depending on what those recommendations coming forward about whether or not that can be met in the reserve, or we need to make additional provision. The specific provision you refer to in the recommendations, it is all about making sure that we can operate in that sort of agile environment that we're trying to move towards.
So it feels as though we've skipped a section to page 29 and onwards about the future part, and we've not quite done 21, 22 from page 26 to 29 yet. So, Councillor Kraske, you had a question. Was that on the initial bit up to page 26?
Chair, thank you. I think this is a new question. While I appreciate the intelligence and the prudence around gathering the transitional reserve in the past, we're now looking to spend that, as we just talked about. Page 22.7 talks about increasing fees and charges by an average of 3%. And elsewhere in the paper, it speaks to inflation, and mentioned elsewhere that inflation is over that. Why we're not increasing in line with inflation? Why are we averaging at 3% on the parking and garden waste, which is going to bring it down lower than 3%?
Councillor Cutler, did you want to step in there?
Well, inflation forecasts are notoriously difficult. No, inflation is likely to go up, but as today's Treasury Management briefing pointed out, it's also likely to come down over time as well, and we felt that this was a good position to take at 3%. I think 5%, the 5% predicted in April would be rather taking it too far.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Did anybody else have questions up to page 26? Councillor Lambie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether he's up to page 26, but it hasn't got recommendations there, we can shovel it in there. I'm just will really be grateful for clarity as to what the policy on car park charging is, because I've listened carefully to what has been said today and read the paper and seen it, and I just don't quite understand. So it'd be really useful just to have it clarified. During the course of the pandemic, the big alarm, the perhaps greatest propensity to panic was the fact that the city centre car parks were empty and the loss of income from the car parks, and that is still expected to have an impact going forward. So clearly, carbon, no, did it say? 12.5, yes, it does. The worry was that we had a lot of reliance on car park income. Councillor Cutler made it clear tonight that we want to drive cars out of the city centre. We don't want them, so we want to be effectively getting a charging policy that discourages cars from coming in. That will lead to an increase in the reduction in income from the car park, or is the intention that we're going to whack up it so high that the remaining poor people who come in will have to pay so much as cover that gap? I don't know. You know, is car park income important? Are we trying to drive it out? Where is the balance? What is the end game here? Because I am confused. Question.
Chair, if I could just start, but obviously I'll leave the comment on strategy to Councillor Tom. But 12.5 refers to car parking income overall. And we are anticipating a reduction in car parking income overall because there are still some areas where demand is lower, and that will continue for a time. That we're forecasting that will improve over time. Parking in the city centre has already recovered and is already demand in the city centre is very high, and we see pretty much full occupancy in the city centre in Manchester.
We're looking to reduce that, trying to get the cars out.
That's where we are at the moment, and then I'll leave it for Councillor Todd to talk about plans.
Yeah, I mean the City of Winchester movement strategy, which as I'm sure I don't need to remind you, was approved in the dying days of the previous Conservative administration. The parking access strategy, which was introduced under the current administration, and the two subsequent reports to the original movement strategy are all clear that what we are trying to do is, while ensuring that people continue to use and enjoy our city centre as much as they ever have, that we are encouraging people to park further out. And we are designing the pricing in order to ensure that. We are also not being complacent about the need to ensure that we have a strong recovery within our city centres and elsewhere as part of the economy. So what we are doing is, for the first time ever, increasing, or the first time in many years, increasing the differential between the city centre air quality management zone and the rest of the city by increasing the charges inside the city centre air quality management area. And we've also talked about the need to come back with proposals that take air quality into account as well, and leaving the other charges unchanged. To me, that's completely consistent with the movement strategy and completely consistent with the parking and access strategy. We've been clear that we need to increase the differential, and it seems to be prudent that if you have a city centre set of car parks that are full, and primarily because of the reduction in commuting, your park and walk car parks and your park and ride car parks are less full, then adjusting your pricing in a way that reflects that seems both prudent and consistent with the policy principles we've previously put in place.
Councillor Lumley.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Lots of words are always appreciated. However, I don't think we've got to my confusion and my question, which is because there is a balance here. If, as you said, you want to drive the cars out of the city centre, not have them there at all, and you're therefore going to have less income. is the intention to milk the car parks in the city centre as much as possible by getting the rates as high as possible, talking about the Mr. Botham's full occupancy, or is it about actually trying to empty those car parks, not have people using those car parks? In which case the question is, where is the money coming from that used to be from those car parks? The whole complicated algorithm and graph and complicated math, which is way above my pay grade, but I assume you might be across that one.
As with all these things, you know, there isn't some massive scientific model sitting in the background that says after you've had a pandemic and you're in the recovery period and you need to work out your parking strategy, here is the mathematical formula to do it. It doesn't exist. It couldn't exist because we're living still in unknown times. We don't know the full impact, for example, of the return to commuting, which is a huge factor. If you look at the level of occupancy of the railway station car parks and you look at the level of occupancy of our car parks near the station, it's clear that there are far fewer people on trains, for example. We just don't know when that's going to come back. We don't know when and if people are going to return to city centre offices. So when we're in a situation of uncertainty, we're managing uncertainty, we have a strategic objective, which is to encourage people to park further out, to park and walk if they can, particularly if they're spending longer in the city. And that is what these pricing changes are designed to do. But because we don't want, you know, we're certainly not setting pricing to drive financial objectives. The primary objective is to drive behaviour and to encourage people to park further out. That is what is sitting behind this. But we're also doing it in a prudent and pragmatic way. We're not going to make a massive, great big experiment with doubling parking charges in the city centre just to see what happens. We have to do it in a prudent and sensible way that delivers the result that we want by encouraging people to park further out, but ensures that our city centre continues to thrive. And I realise looking in from the Meon Valley that it might feel like a small matter to just ramp up the charges to see what happens, but that is not the approach we want to take if we're going to ensure not only that we're encouraging more environmental parking by encouraging people to park further out, but also a strong and thriving city centre. We are, as we always have said within the parking and access strategy, those are the two things we seek to balance, and the proposal to increase charges in the central air quality management area with its full car parks and leave the others unchanged is entirely consistent.
Councillor Cutler.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think Councillor Lumbey is sort of suggesting that if cars don't come into the centre, we won't be receiving any income from them. The whole point is an element of displacement, but the income would still be coming maybe from slightly lower charges in the outer ring car parks. And the other point I'd make is that we've already had the discussion around the strategic spending review. Or strategic service review. Of course, a key part of that will be about income. And so we will look at a longer term balance of income from car parking as opposed from other sources. So that will be brought in. It's one of the reasons why we need to take time and do a lot of work on it, because we need to know how it's settling down. So that's a key part of it, will be a key part of it. So what is a long-term strategy where our dependence on car parking revenue may need to reduce? But that's a very long term. And in the shorter term is the work on the air quality management within the city centre.
Does anybody else have any questions up until page 26 before we go on to 21, 22? So 21, 22 from page 26 to 29, the budget update. Does anyone have any questions on the budget update? Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I had a specific question on page 26 about the additional leisure centre income. And I know there is some more detail about that in the paper, but I wondered whether that income was because you didn't use a deficit provision or whether that was just additional income that we weren't expecting.
Yeah, the revised budget did include provision for a tougher start for the leisure centre operation. We agreed to take an open book approach with the operator, and we were anticipating that could have a negative impact on the budget, so we made some provision for that. The early figures are far stronger than we were anticipating, and the surpluses that are included within this forecast take account of that. We're still working on that. Obviously, we're watching that. As I say, it's an open book approach that we're taking at the moment. We know utility costs are increasing, so that's going to have an impact the other way. But we'll obviously revise that, refine that forecast as we get closer towards the year end. But that, at the time when the report was drafted, that was considered to be a reasonable position to do.
May I ask a quick supplementary, Chair? Have we put any provisioning going forward for the leisure centre? So what I'm really asking is it likely that we could see a budget bonus coming in future years because the leisure centre is doing a lot better than anticipated?
A question I asked, Chair, and I've been assured that at the moment there isn't anything that indicates that. But then I suppose the operator would tell us that, wouldn't they? So, no, I mean, I think at the moment the assumptions are that from next year we'll be reverting to the previously agreed business case. I think there are ongoing discussions with the operator as to whether or not that is proving to be the case, and so we'll update members as soon as there's more known.
Councillor Lumley.
So as a follow-up to that, did the 40% increase in charges to the able to use swimming pool add to that increase in that excess?
Chair, I haven't got the analysis available to hand to understand the full impact of that. That's the overall position that we're looking at.
Thank you. This kind of crosses over with the next area and the fees and charges piece, but on section 12.2a, it talks about the garden waste subscription and says that there's been a surplus of 250,000, and so there's going to be a 3 month in February. I just wanted to ask why we're giving everybody a 3 month in February, but only give certain people a £10 concession, because to my mind it would have been better used to give better concessionary rates to those who really need it. So I just wanted to ask that question. Councillor Cutler.
The 3 month in February was around the fact that there had been problems with collections, which impacted a significant number of people due to the shortage of drivers, and so it was felt that being able to extend it to 13 months was a good way of compensating for that problem.
Thank you. Does anybody else, Councillor Becker?
Thanks, Chair. At 12.4 on page 28, there is reference to supporting agile, flexible working. Now, I feel incredibly sorry for the staff who had to put up with a Citrix environment and fixed desk provision for the past almost 2 years. Can it be confirmed, do staff have laptops? Have they been using their own facilities? How have they been working from home?
Mr. Faison.
Chair, we have over the course of the last year, we have invested quite significantly in additional laptop provision. So we have been providing laptops to staff that needed them. We do still have a mixed provision, so staff who have preferred to use their own equipment have been able to, but certainly where they've needed a laptop, we've invested in that. Obviously, what this is seeking to do is to invest in the right tech so that we can provide that more flexible working environment that and address some of the restrictions that you've obviously highlighted in your question.
Thank you. And my quick supplementary relates to what you just said, that £300,000. Have we already incurred some of those costs, or is this an additional £300,000 to be covered by the grant?
That would be in addition to the investment we've already made in the
Thank you, Mr. Othman. Does anybody else have any question on page 26 to 29? Budget update 21-22? No? Okay, so let's come on. Apologies, Councillor Cromwell.
Apologies from me for being a bit slow putting my hand up. In section 12.6, the Hampshire Cultural Trust grant. I mean, this sounds really exciting, and if it all comes off the plan, I think we'll all think it's good value. But what conditions in terms of deliverable experience and duration are attached to this grant?
Councillor Murray, I'm led to believe you should be able to assist with that one.
Well, I have to say this has been a cross-cabinet project. As you say, this is really exciting, and I think it's important in terms of the deliverable experience to understand that this isn't just around the base where people start. So the £75,000 is around enabling that base, that starting point, and the initial part of the experience to take place. But in fact, the nature of the experience is that it encourages people to explore the town. It goes a lot broader than just the initial part of the project, and it will encourage people to get to a lot of the places which tourists never reach, allow them to experience the history of various parts of Winchester, and also pull them past an awful lot of shops, pubs and cafes, which is all part of how it will help boost the local economy.
Thank you. Councillor Todd?
Yeah, it's important to stress that it is a grant and not a contract, and there are limits to how much you can condition that, but it is actually the point they laid out not only the vision of what they were seeking to do, and Councillor Learning has gone through that in some detail, but also the partners they're planning to work with. Both for delivery and in terms of the partner for the promotion of the overall programme, the Ubisoft Assassin's Creed link. And what we've seen so far is that what they've told us is already being delivered. So, for example, those of you who play Assassin's Creed will notice that the new educational version of the game has come out, and you spend an awfully long time wandering all over the country carrying the Winchester reliquary and exploring Winchester and learning all about it as part of the in-game experience, speaking as somebody who has tried it out. So there is very strong push for Winchester. It is something where if you've played the game and know somebody who has, it is absolutely centred on Winchester. And this is a game that is played by millions of people all over the world. And so having the ability to follow through on that with a great experience in the city itself, where people can learn about what they've learned about in the game, is a great opportunity for us as a city. And they have got proven partners who know what they're doing in this space to work with, which is an important part of our confidence in supporting their proposal.
You don't strike me as an Assassin's Creed kind of man, but I'm glad you've tried it.
Would you say Valhalla? I reckon that would
Assassin's Creed Valhalla. No, I can recommend it, and it's worth getting the Irish and French add-ons. Now actually playing through the entire game.
Moving on to page.
Thousands of people I've already killed during the process of it. But anyway.
Did a cabinet member kills tens of thousands of people?
In order to promote Winchester.
Can we move along? Budget options proposals for 22-23 and beyond. So coming on to page 29 and going up into page 41. Does anybody have any questions on this section, please? Councillor Lumby.
Thank you, Chair. And just picking up and wanting to understand better on this garden waste discount. We learned later in the paper that we're going to get at least, I think £10 a month at least increase in rents. A £10 for a year reduction doesn't seem like very much for people who are really struggling to get by. And looking back at that surplus, which you kindly drew our attention to before, it seemed to say that even after the extra month was given for free, there was still a large amount of money left over. Is it not incumbent on us to do more to help people who, frankly, are not able to afford, in many cases, to get a garden waste bin, or are getting it but at the expense of something else? And in the countryside, it is very much an issue. Should we not be pushing for as large a discount as we can possibly get, given the size of the surplus elsewhere?
Who would like to respond to this one? Councillor Todd?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say, we will have the cheapest garden waste service in Hampshire after with this discount. So there are other people offering discounts. There are other people charging for the initial bin. We don't charge for the initial bin. You know, a lot of our neighbours are charging much, much more than we are already. And we are going to be offering a discount on what was already, I think, the second cheapest charge in Hampshire. So, and we will be, I think, one of only two authorities that offer that kind of discount. So, you know, I would obviously, we have watched the value very closely. We don't know how many people are going to renew next year. We hope everybody will. There is a question of financial pressure on the council as a whole, which means that we need to be careful in what we're doing. We also have other things that we wish to be exploring within the waste management budget, such as the trial of garden waste, trial of food waste collections, and also the work that's related to the move to twin sort and the other big changes that are coming up. So while while it would be great to be in a position where we felt confident to offer a bigger discount, this is what we felt was the prudent figure to go after in the current situation, knowing that we would be offering the cheapest garden waste collections in the entire county as a result of this discount.
Does anybody else have questions on page 29? Councillor Hall. Councillor Hall, thanks.
Thank you. It's to do with the brown bin, the garden waste, as we call it. Councillor Todd made a comment there that we don't charge them for the bin. And there seems to be a bit of confusion out there in the world of Winchester, because I have residents who have decided they're more than likely not going to renew it, and they're being told when that happens, they said, well, come and collect your bin. So I think there's a bit of confusion there, so perhaps that could be ironed out, please. Thank you.
Councillor Todd?
The bin is provided free of charge as part of the service. If people don't wish to have the service anymore, then they won't have the bin anymore, but we do not charge separately for the bin. If you're in Basingstoke, you're paying around £30, Hart £30, Test Valley £26, East Hants £30. So there's lots of other people who charge separately when you get the bin, and then they charge the repeating annual charge on top of that. And we don't do that. We only charge the annual service fee, which includes the provision of a bin. But if you stop having the service fee, then it gets taken away. But it is a flat rate for the service according to the size of bin. So obviously you pay £59 for the big bin, £39 for the small bin. But that's the principle of it.
Councillor Todd, I understand the principle, if you could turn off your microphone, maybe. I understand the principle of collecting bins, and I understood that to be the case from the start, is that if you don't have the service, you don't have the bin. I wondered how much additional cost that would cost the council, though, going around to recollect the bins. I'm just curious as to if there was a figure on that.
I don't think it's necessarily being costed, but it's an obvious thing when we take that bin and give it to somebody else who has signed up to the service. So that's where you see the immediate saving. If a new person signs up for a bin, obviously we need to buy the bin for that person unless we're able to reuse one that's been previously used somewhere else.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair, and it relates to income generation on page 35. The comment that there are opportunities to invest and generate financial return. It's already been referred to this evening, I think, in conversations. It's not about necessarily cutting things, it may be generating more income. So my question is, why are we still sitting on assets, significant number of assets that the council owns that are not generating an income return? We've taken a strategic decision on some deliberately not to turn them into significantly generating activities. We have some boarded up or with stickers on the windows, and we still don't have many of the new projects actually starting after 2.5 years of this administration. So the question is to Mr. Botham and the team, what is stopping us generating that income from those assets that we already own? Thank you.
Councillor Cutler, do you want to come in and show this?
Councillor.
Councillor Lerner?
Well, I think I'll ask Mr. Botham to speak first and then I'll come in afterwards.
Chair, we are in the process of bringing forward a refresh of the asset management strategy, which will look specifically at individual assets, and the answer to your question is probably different for every asset that we're referring to. So we do have a number which will require significant investment, but to get them into a condition where it could generate a significant opportunity. So those are being some have been brought forward. I did email members earlier this evening, which I should have done before, apologies for that, around the Guildhall Cafe. So that's an example where we're generating an annual surplus from that straight away. So that scheme has been completed, generates us £40,000 to £50,000 a year from that. So where those opportunities are clear, where we can identify a secure option being pursued, some of them we're testing the market still around, what is the opportunity, what is the best solution, and they're being brought forward as part of the capital strategy. But I don't know if Councillor Lerner wants to add anything to.
No, I mean, as Mr. Botham says, each property has a tendency to have different issues around it. Capacity, though, is a significant issue. We have our estate property and asset management people are very busy on a whole range of different issues, particularly River Park, Central Winchester and various other projects that are underway. For example, the Good Shed project out at Barfield, which we're bringing forward. So as well as managing all of our existing assets and tenants, which has been quite intensive work over the pandemic period, the properties you bring up in particular over the road are structurally, we have structural issues there. They're going to take significant amounts of finance to bring back into use, although we're having a look at that and the options around that, that will take a little bit of time to bring forward. But we're always looking at everything. And if any member would like to come and see me and talk about any individual projects or even the big long list, then I'm very happy to do that.
Does anybody else? Councillor Corris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring to page 31, section 15E, fees and charges. There's a statement in here that says these charges seek to ensure the cost of the relevant service provision is met by service users rather than from the wider council tax base. And that makes a lot of sense to me. If it's discretionary for the user, then they should pay for it and so on. So my question relates to the area of planning, where if I'm referring ahead to a later agenda item, there are quite a number of places where we're not increasing the fees, and yet strategically, I'm sure, well, I certainly would vote for it, and I'm sure most councillors here would vote for staff to have some kind of pay increase from the end of next April. So if our wages are going to be increased, not so much ours, but staff wages are going to increase, how are we going to reconcile that without putting up the charges for the services that they provide? And is there not an opportunity perhaps to address some of the, service levels by, increasing the income, perhaps having extra staff to be able to improve the service levels in those departments?
Who would like to respond to staff increases?
Again, obviously, we'll get into the discussion around this on one of the later papers, won't we? But we do, as the paper says, the principle of recovering costs from users of services rather than the wider tax base, I think, is a principle that the report seeks to continue. The answer will be different. Again, there's another one where it is a case-by-case basis. So many of our planning charges are statutory charges, so we are not able to increase those. I think one of the earlier references to some of the fines, well, they're set nationally, so again, we can't necessarily increase those. And a particular example of one of the areas where we're quite tightly controlled around that is around our building control fees. We can cover our costs, but we can't generate a surplus. But the building control regulations prevent us from generating surplus. We reviewed those costs significantly last year, increased them significantly, and we're just taking a cautious approach to make sure we don't over-recover and then have to pay people back. So, but generally the principle is we're seeking to increase in line with our increasing cost base.
Councillor Cromwell's now, so just wanted to say on page 38, there's a table there that talks about key assumptions, and there is expenditure employee pay inflation of 2% accounted for. Does anybody else have any questions up to page 41? No. Oh, Councillor Burns.
Chair, I just really wanted to comment on the point you just made about the employee pay inflation at 2%. If you actually look, it immediately more than wipes out the 3% district council tax increase. And given that that's capped by central government, it sort of sets the tone for just the struggle that the council is up against in budgeting and balancing this budget. I did have a question. However, I just wondered sort of how confident we are about the inflation rate that we're sort of predicting. I know we're looking at 3.2% in the short term. We then think it will come back down to 2%, and a lot of the assumptions in this paper are predicated on that. I just wondered if Mr. Boson could give a little more clarity about how confident we are it will come back down to 2%. Thank you.
You're on your own.
It's obviously very difficult to forecast what's going to happen with inflation rates. We were anticipating a larger increase in September and actually went down in September. So it is extremely difficult to forecast, and we do it on the best case we can here. We do obviously have external advisors that are advising us on that as well. So we base a lot of our projections on the information that they include there. What obviously is particularly difficult at the moment are some of those increases around building costs and around utilities, which is making forecasting on future inflation rates extremely difficult.
Thank you. So coming on to the first appendix, Appendix A. Does anybody have any questions on Appendix A? Council tax base. Okay, Appendix B, coming on to the general fund earmarked reserves. Does anybody have any questions on that, please? That's the horrible.
Thank you, Chair. I read with confidence in the report that Mr. Botham is saying that the reserves are adequate, but this evening we talked a lot about uncertainty and unknown. So just a question to put on the record that obviously Appendix B does provide the significant list of earmarked reserves available across various parts of the council's activity, those that are restricted and those that are more available. Are you confident that these are all as a best estimate as we can achieve at this point? And is there anything that is waking you up at 3 in the morning about this reserve list? Thank you.
Chair, confidence I can be around the projections on the reserves. There are some, you can always refine them with, as soon as we finalise the asset management strategy, for example, the asset reserve will be amended to reflect that, and we'll need to call on that. And so we'll increase spending as it's clarified. As far as nervousness around reserves, and it would be around a major investment reserve, which has always traditionally been the key tool the council has used to support it in project delivery, and that reduces to a level that is far lower than we would want to see it. So that how we can replenish that major investment reserve will help. That's what helps us deliver projects more quickly, and that's what. The reassurance around that is that we're maintaining healthy balances on a healthy general fund balance and reserves in other areas. So, my statement around the overall robustness of reserves, I think, is reasonable. But in light of the things we'd like to achieve, then the major investment reserve is one where we need to look how can we reinvest in that area to give us forward funding.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crest?
I always labour this point and feel rather foolish every time I do it, but I will continue to do it. Just in terms of the SIL funding we have in the general fund, when you combine the two with the fund and the Winter Town, looking at 12 million, and just our inability to spend that. I've spoken previously about petitioning the government to look at different ways we could spend that. I find it difficult to increase council tax when we've got 12 million sitting there doing nothing. I would like to find a way to spend that money, if not by transferring it to the transition reserve, which is not possible under the structure. But I would like to find a way to actually spend that money so that we can make some money from it. So if that could be part of the spending review, that would be helpful. That's more complaints rather than a question.
Understood, Councillor Cross, but that is for infrastructure projects and is taken from developers and the like, specifically for infrastructure projects. So there's no way to just suddenly shuffle it off somewhere else, unfortunately. Councillor Cutler, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a case for a policy to attempt to use that money to a greater extent, but it doesn't really come into the budgeting process because it's a restricted reserve and it can't be used outside of the SIL rules. So it's almost a discussion for another place, is that are we using the SIL money as effectively and as quickly as we possibly can. But it has proved to be quite difficult to spend, as I think you know, Chair, from your experiences holding the planning portfolio.
It is, but I do keep saying, can we increase the amount for the district? So I do keep banging that door. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on Appendix B? So I am going to come to debate on the paper as a whole, but I just want to redraw our attention to the fact that this is our opportunity to consult and give our feedback. Does anybody have any specific points of feedback that we'd like them to consider in this budget options paper that we haven't already mentioned? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for not picking it up sooner. We talk, I think, on page 31 about community grants, and I know that the current budget provision is based on that 20% reduction, and it was raised at the Health and Environment Policy Committee that we were concerned that that reduction was coming in a year when many of our community organisations would be under increased demand. And so what I'd like officers and Councillor Cutler to consider is, if the spending review is better than anticipated, could we please look again at that reduction and see if there's perhaps a way of dampening it so it doesn't all fall in the first year, or what options there are around that. I know Mr. Botham has said that if there is more in the spending review than we anticipate, we would set that aside to reducing our deficit in future years, but I would make a plea for those community grants.
Councillor Ferguson, could I just defer to Councillor Clear here, because it was indeed her at that committee that committed to re-reviewing the piece on grants. Councillor Clear, are you with us?
I'm here, Chair. Yes, thank you.
Do you have any comment there, Councillor Clear?
Well, it is difficult. Obviously it is difficult, and we are calling in organisations in the next week to go through a few options with them. Of course, I'd like more money, and if we could consider, and I've always said it, that if things look better and the revenue looks better looking forward, then I would just say I'd love some more monies, please. But at the moment, I can quite understand where we are at the present time.
Thank you, Councillor Clear. Does that come as a response? I will put it as a note for consideration on Wednesday. Does anybody have any other council power?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not. It comes back to discretionary charges, and the example I will use is car parking outside Winchester. I'm not sure if we increase those car parking charges, it would make a significant difference to the budget. And I take the point that we are in a situation where Hampshire County Council are taking back control of Hill Street parking, and that will skew the what we can charge sensibly. However, I was promised a parking strategy for Alresford, I think 7 years ago. And to have it continually kicked into the long grass when we residents are experiencing problems with parking every single day of their lives, I find that we should be not waiting on the county to put up car parking fees in our off-street car parks, if that would make a significant contribution to the budget and avoid a very small part of what we have to put on council tax, or indeed fund Councillor Clear's grant programme.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Should I just make it as a note? Councillor Lumley?
I am also very worried about car parking charges, but for the reverse reason. Both in the city centre, where far from believing we should double the prices, I don't think we should be increasing it at all. I think we should do all we can right across the district, support our businesses and the high streets by attracting people back into them, and to be attracting greater tourism to the area, so all our car parks are used. I'm really worried that fragile market towns could be damaged if we start driving people away because of increased charges. Now, you're the Alresford expert, and I wouldn't presume to comment there. But I am very worried as a principle that people, once they're in their cars and out the countryside, you will get in your car to go shopping, or almost, 95 times out of 100. I want to read, you've got a choice, and if you happen to pay too much to go somewhere, you'll go somewhere else. And the distinction between what is attractive as a destination and what isn't, these things can have a real impact, and I think we have to be terribly careful about fiddling too much with charges. So that was all I wanted to say in the car park charges.
Councillor Powell first, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may respond, the market town economy in Alresford depends as their bread and butter money on local shoppers. And those local shoppers use the free on-street parking. And I have to say that our local independents have thrived during lockdown, and I'm very proud of them. So I think there is, if it would raise revenue, maybe it could be an option for the budget consultations. Maybe that would flush out what happens, what the view is across the district. And we do consult on budget options there. And I offer that as a suggestion. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. I've made a note of that as Oxford because separately, if I come to Denmead, it works perfectly exactly the way it is. And if anything were to change, it might mess it up. So I've made a specific note on Oxford. Councillor Todd.
Obviously, we're planning to treble the car parking charges in Denmead from 0 to 0. In terms of the other charges in the other places, the figures, the amount that will be raised is relatively small. It's about £1,500 per market town for increasing the charges there by 3%. That's not far off how much it would cost to adjust the machines to cope with the extra prices and pay for new signs. So there's no burning financial need to do this, which is why the proposal in the paper is to do it as part of an integrated plan with each of the market towns. So there may be discussions in one place to say, well, we'd quite like to invest in, let's say, resurfacing Wickham Square, but then we would have to look at the pricing that went alongside that. In Alresford, there are going to be some pricing changes as a consequence of the new arrangements agreed with the Watercress line. So there will be changes that come out of that. But I suggest what's needed there is a joined up plan when we find out what Hampshire is intending to do with on the street, to make sure that whatever we do with the off-street car parking is consistent with that. So we could look at increases, but more or less most of the money would go into the actual implementation of the increases rather than making much difference to the finances. So it makes sense to wait and do a review in the context of the overall strategy.
Noted, Councillor Todd, thank you. Councillor Powell.
And in the light of that information of £1,500 per market town, I withdraw the suggestion, Chair.
I shall scribble it down.
Worth doing.
Thank you. Councillor Horn.
Chair, there's a more general point I'm just picking up this evening, that depending on which part of the district you live in, you might have a view of green waste or parking charges. Different communities think of these things differently. I think it's an opportunity in the consultation that we're legally required to do in the new year, and certainly as part of the strategic financial review committed to for next year, that we should be asking very clearly our residents some questions, direct questions about their views of these things, because many people will say, yes, I'm happy to pay more for this, but not for that. And I think it would be helpful for us to get some level of clarity, given the breadth of our district, and we could do that in the short term, but certainly as we do the strategic review. I think both opportunities give us a chance to ask our residents really what they think about how we operate and how our financial decisions impact them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I've noted that. Right, so if we come on to now debate, does anybody have any debate on this paper? Councillor Lumbie.
Thank you, Chair. So I've already said my piece of car park charges, so I'll just stick with garden waste. I'm afraid I don't really accept the argument that, well, we're already the cheapest and therefore it's fine to only give a small discount. The reality is, under the old system, garden waste collection was entirely means tested. It was based on the council tax. That's how it was charged for and collected. We are, relatively speaking, a rich district with lots of people who were able to afford the charges being put here. This isn't about people who can afford to pay. This is about people who can't afford to pay. People in the city and out in the countryside who are struggling to get by and have struggled greatly over the last 18 months and are now being hit with things like high utility rates and everything else. And we learn they're potentially getting an increase in rent. And it seems to me that we shouldn't be saying, oh, well, we're already the second lowest in Hampshire, so it's fine. We should actually be saying, let's address a policy that properly helps people who can't afford to pay and supports the collection of garden waste. I would therefore like to see substantially greater discount given to people who have issues with paying. Personally, I think 50% is too low, and I would give it to them for free. But you know, there's a whole range. But I think £10 is frankly derisory and not enough. And I do think we should be going a lot further. And I think it is incumbent on us to look after our whole district, particularly the people who are least able to pay.
Thank you, Councillor Lomby. Does anybody else have any debate on this paper? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to thank officers and Councillor Cutler for producing the paper and the clarity within the paper. I had a number of points. I am really pleased that the administration had the foresight to create the transitional reserve a number of years ago, and that transitional reserve can be used and is being used to see us through this difficult period. I'm also really delighted to see that strategic service spending review coming forward next year. And I also am pleased as well that there is a slight delay to allow things to settle before that review actually takes place. On the garden waste, I think when I was in Cabinet, I was the Cabinet member who was pushing very hard that we had a reduced rate for those of our residents who are on lower incomes. And I'm actually, again, really pleased, and I'd like to congratulate Councillor Todd and the other Cabinet members for actually fulfilling on their promise to look at this and to come forward with a discount. 25% will make it the cheapest in the whole of Hampshire, and we have to recognise that. I would perhaps ask that if in future years we see that this garden waste service is continuing to make a profit, that we may be able to look at that again. With regard to the car parking charges, I just wanted to clarify something. It feels slightly disingenuous to me to suggest the 3% increase in parking charges that's being put forward for the air quality management zone is in some way going to drive people out of the city. It's very clear that this is a differential parking strategy, which is designed to encourage people to come into the city, but perhaps to park slightly further out. And that slightly further out is a few minutes walk. It's not several miles, and we need to be clear about that. I also think that when we think about the city and think about a city thriving, we have to consider there are many factors. Too many cars in the centre can also make it a place where people don't want to come. So yes, the emphasis very much for me in this paper is that thoughtful process of considering what might work to help businesses thrive, but also which will still work to allow people to come in when they need to drive. So I welcome this paper. I look forward to the strategic service spending review coming forward and the options that will bring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Does anybody else have any debate? Councillor Hobbie.
Chair, the rather interesting point about this paper, I think, is that it is quite limited in its approach. I hear Mr. Botham's
comments this evening. I thank him for tackling our questions so ably. However, I do think we are in serious need of that strategic review that I raised earlier. The opportunity does exist to consult with residents and appreciate the shape of the district, and there are some very prominent charges here that mean different things to different parts of the district, and I think we should be cognizant of that. I'm sorry that given we're getting the spending review data at the beginning of December, we won't get a very meaningful chance to look at this again before the paper's put to bed and it comes to the Budget Council, because essentially that's what we're being told. And I think the nature of the importance of this is that it would have been a good opportunity for us to have had another look, but I understand that timings are deemed to be short. And I think perhaps in that context, obviously a 3-year view will be beneficial to us and allow us to have a longer term view of where we're heading. So Chair, I thank the officers for the work that they have done to get us to this point, and appreciate the time that we've given to this very important paper tonight, which clearly should absolutely be debated at scrutiny well in advance so that we can have these discussions and hopefully for those comments to be taken on board in some shape or form by the Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. This paper does come back on February the 1st, so once the December details are in it, so we do get another thorough outing on February the 1st. Any other debate on this paper? I just wanted to come back regarding the parking piece. I understand from the air quality, trying to reduce in city centre parking and move it out into the perimeter. I would also balance that with the convenience, and if we look at what makes the out of town shopping areas so popular is that you park in the middle for free, whiz into your shop, whiz out. So whilst I completely agree that we need to reduce the city centre parking for air quality purposes, I would ask that this gets taken, and it's not for this paper, but gets taken into the wider local planning review, because of course the shops that are the ones that you would want to nip into and nip out of are the ones that we need perhaps more on the perimeter, and those that are more of a central shopping in the middle. So while that's not specifically on this paper, it was just my thoughts on the parking and how that should lead to the local plan review. Right, so the recommendation here was that we have a thorough debate, which we've done. Is everybody content that we've noted this, we thoroughly debated it, and then we move on to item number 7? Right, so item 7, housing revenue account business plan and budget options paper, pages 45 to 70. We're seeing this report before it goes to Cabinet on the 23rd of November. We're being asked to comment on it. I'd like to hand over to Councillor Learning and Mr. Botham to introduce this. Councillor Learning, would you like to go first?
I'm very much in listening mode this evening, Chairman, so I'll invite Mr. Botham to set out the context in which we're talking about this evening.
Mr. Botham, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, each year we obviously bring forward a refresh of the Council's housing revenue account business plan and review options that for the budget that will be brought forward, the legal budget that will be brought forward in February next year. Obviously, a key part of that, and the one that obviously is most directly relevant to all of our tenants, is the rent setting process. So it's the rent on which we base our assumptions. So the paper sets out proposals in relation to rent increase. There is a national policy with regard to rent setting, and the council has always followed that national policy. And that policy is based around making sure that the overall cost to the nation around benefits bill is controlled in some way. So the So we can increase rents to whatever level or decrease to whatever level we want, but the government assume that landlords increase at a given rate, and the rate they're saying at the moment is consumer price index plus 1%. And they base all of their national assumptions on that, and they will adjust credit payments, universal credit payments accordingly on that basis. If we set a lower rent increase, they just reduce those payments. So the report sets out how a business plan that can deliver the aspirations of the council plan. So the target for 1,000 homes, invest in the housing services has been agreed till now. So it's maintaining decent homes, it's investing in estate improvements. So all of those assumptions are built in. And based on the assumption that we go with the national, with the rent increase in line with the national policy, the paper demonstrates that is a sustainable, we can deliver a sustainable plan over 30 years, over the life of the business plan. The paper also includes an alternative option. We could set a lower rent increase. So the option 2 in the paper is an inflation-only rent increase. Now, that obviously has been given serious consideration, particularly in light of some of the pressures we know our tenants are facing at the moment. The points as set out in the report is that increase would not be of benefit to anybody in receipt of housing benefits or universal credit, because their support payments would simply just be adjusted to whatever we charge. It would also mean that it would bring forward over £10 million, reduction of over £10 million in our investment in housing services moving forward. It would be affordable. We could still deliver a sustainable business plan with that level of rent increase. So that's the judgment the Cabinet needs to consider. On balance, the recommendation of the report is recommending the CPI +1, and the impact of that is set out in the tables in the paper. Because that will allow, that's the option that allows the option in investment in our services moving forward, and the impact of not doing that obviously is set out as well. We have also modelled not increasing the rents, and that would result in an unsustainable business plan. So we couldn't maintain our current service levels if we didn't increase our housing rents, and that would. So we're not bringing forward that as an option. So it's highlighted in the report as an option that we have considered, but we are not recommending that come forward. I have met with representatives of our tenants. So I met with TACT in person, took them through the report. They welcomed the proposals in the paper, did consider specifically, obviously spent most of their time around the rent option, and they expressed a preference for an inflationary increase. I did highlight the impact that had on this plan, and they did appreciate that, but they felt in the current circumstances that's what the position that they would be lobbying Cabinet for. So that's a summary of the chair. We do have Dick Johnson, the housing accountant, on the line for any specific questions around the detail in the paper. There is a lot of detail in the paper. But that highlights, I think, the key areas for decision that Cabinet will need to consider next.
Thank you, Mr. Botham. So we're going to take the paper as a whole and then take the appendices separately. So does anybody have any questions on pages 47 to 65, the main book of the report? Councillor Lumbey.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the renting increase. Knew it was coming. Can I just understand, because I know we went through this last year and we had the same conversation, and to the extent the person on universal credit, their credit will be increased by the same amount as the rent increase. So for them, there is no impact. How many of our tenants do that not apply to? I.e., how many people are actually being hit with a real increase? What's the sort of numbers, either percentages or hard numbers?
I don't have the hard numbers to hand. We do know that there are well over half of our tenants are in receipt of benefit. But we are looking at about 40% who pay their full rent. And so that
How many tenants do we have now?
and that's about 5,000.
So that's about 2,000 tenants will be actually paying the full increase. Question.
Councillor Hall. I'm afraid I'm in the same camp, and that is that at this particular time in this community, as Mr. Botham said, over half of our tenants are in receipt of benefits. How we should be really thinking very hard about this. One of the good things is the HRA business plan is actually in good shape. We're not down at heel, which is an excellent position, and I accept that obviously over the recent past the government asked us to not put up the rents. We had that 4-year window, and obviously so the average increases over a period of time I think we've calculated just over just about 2%. But the HRA is in good heart. We're doing a lot. We're looking after our properties. We're still building. And so I think our question that we have to ask ourselves as some of the most vulnerable in our community, would this be the year to actually just step aside slightly and take that lesser increase? I accept that at one extreme, that's not good long term, and the implications for the budget. But I think we have to think about that really, really clearly and be absolutely assured that we are doing our best for all residents in this district, because not everyone lives in one of the most expensive houses in the country. Not everyone has access to income and jobs, and on that basis, that some of those individuals would really appreciate the difference. We hear a lot about some of the individuals who are accessing food banks and other facilities in the city in the way they haven't in the past. So a question that we need to ask very clearly of ourselves, because this is absolutely in our control and we're not putting a financial pressure on the system. So I ask for clarity as to why the recommendation is for that higher level. Councillor Lanning.
Thank you. If I can respond to that. The reason for having the 2 increases, potential increases within the paper, was so that the choices could be set out clearly in terms of what we wouldn't be able to do going forward. And it's important to remember that under the current system, you cannot at any point in the future claw that money back. You know, we're setting out the trajectory for quite a long period of time. I am very mindful of the issues around our tenants, but I'm also very mindful about the issues around the people who aren't our tenants. We have about 15% of people in the district live in private rented housing. Now, obviously, many of those are actually quite affluent people, but an awful lot of them aren't, who would love to be paying the kind of rents that we have on our social housing. To put it into context, the median private rent is £360 a week for a 3-bedroomed house. So we do have to recognise that we will be able to, we're looking at potentially building fewer socially rented properties in the future. We're also looking at the amount of money we can potentially spend on moving to lowering the increasing the fuel efficiency of our properties, and there are a whole load of other implications. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't go for the inflation over the increase. I don't want to say that we have made that choice, but it was so that we could present these options properly to both TACT and to other members of the council. I think it is important that we do have a look properly at the implications of this. But as I say, Cabinet are in listening mode and are keen to hear what members as well as TACT think.
I'd just like to remind everybody at this point that TACT fed back to us that they preferred option 2, the 3.1% rise. Councillor Becker.
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted to ask if we've calculated the energy savings that residents may enjoy if we are able to offer them energy saving measures using the 1% increase, or the additional 1% increase that they wouldn't otherwise be able to enjoy.
No, that's rather an overcomplicated calculation for us to do at this point in time when we're budget setting, rather than having done the detailed work behind exactly what we'd spend the money on.
But there will be some saving.
You would anticipate so, but that does depend on the trajectory of, fuel costs and all kinds of different issues. We are very much committed, though, to focusing our energy work on measures that do reduce residents' energy bills, rather than necessarily diving straight into zero carbon fuel options.
Chair, if I could just add on that specific point, whilst we haven't calculated the potential savings to residents directly, what we do know is that to achieve anywhere near net carbon neutral for our housing stock will cost in the region of 45 million, I think was quoted in the report. And we've set aside 15 million, so we're some way short of that. I would agree with the statement Councillor Horrell made that the HRA is in good shape and is a sustainable business. We have a sustainable plan there. There are a whole host of things we can't invest in at the moment and keep that plan sustainable.
Okay, I'm now in charge. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman, Deputy Chairman. Could we ask what the impact on new home delivery would be were it only to be CPI rather than CPI plus 1?
Mr. Matthew.
On the page of the report, it's effectively the difference between to equate to the provision of around 58 affordable homes.
Over the lifetime of the plan.
15.1 of the last sentence. Any more questions? Oh yes, Councillor Horrell. Actually, Councillor, what you found? So Councillor Grace. No, you're pointing around.
No, I think Councillor Horrell will speak.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. The new homes delivery is obviously a fundamental part of the plan, and I think supported, thankfully, by our residents who endorse what we do. Is there, and we have an ambitious target, which Councillor Murley knows we're very supportive of in terms of delivering across the district. Is there more that we can do in partnership with others to drive that number up? Have we looked at that? Because as we know, the gap between those who can afford and those who cannot is not a small one in our district. Just a question about approach. Thank you, Chair.
We do continue to explore those options. There are a number of registered providers in the district that are invested in new homes. We have some partnership agreements that we've made with developers that have been subject to cabinet reports in recent times. So that's an illustration of what we've achieved today. There are a range of other opportunities where councils work with developers and registered providers to improve that programme. You will see in the table just after power 12.3 in the report that yes, we do deliver 1,000 homes through this through this programme over the next 10 years. There isn't much going on beyond that at the moment within the business plan. So what happens in the latter part of the plan, we've yet to determine how we can really ramp up those numbers after 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Councillor Croyson, that question before me?
Councillor Croyson, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Chair. So I think my question builds on something you were starting to talk to Mr. Botham. Now, I think we all know that the district as a whole is an expensive district to live in across the whole country, and Winchester is especially expensive to live in. So the fact that we have a substantial council and social housing estate is really, really good. It is also really, really good that we are planning to build 1,000 additional such places over the next 10 years. But when I look at the graph, it sort of falls off like a cliff straight after that. So my question, and you started to talk to that about long-term planning and so on. My question is, how far in advance do we need to be planning? Should we be starting to think, how do we maintain that run rate of 80 to 90 houses per year, even going 10 years in advance, and what are key constraints that kind of limit being able to achieve that?
Sorry, Chair, but what could I not do? I think what we used when we set the business plan for the current year, that was the first year where we were able to demonstrate how we could fund that 1,000 homes. So that was the focus of a problem that needed solving, and we demonstrated how the bank can do that. What we've yet to do, I suppose, is that next phase of work around what can it do after then, and you'll see that the resources available don't support a continuation of 1,000 every 10 years. As of yet, and that's the challenge for the council now, is to look at what options do we have for replicating that programme later in the business plan. One of those options, as Councillor Hall has already said, is around partnership. That may be through Homes England grant, and maybe a whole range of options that we could use to do that. We've yet to do that piece of work, and those are, but when we should be doing it, well, now already. So we need to be looking now at options 10 years hence to think, well, what replaces that programme.
I could ask a supplementary then. It sounds like the constraint is finance planning rather than real estate. Or is it real estate in itself, the actual land to build things on, that is the problem?
We've always highlighted, I think, the challenge to the short-term programme is land to build. That was the development strategy highlights very much that that's the challenge. We've made some provision within the business plan to procure land, but actually procuring the right land is really, really very challenging. So I think that finance planning will become a problem for that latter part of the business.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair. When I look at the figures, I always sort of look at what the numbers actually mean in reality, and the difference between the 3.1% CPI or the CPI plus 1%. Looking at the average figures you've given us, equates to, it's either going to be another £220 a year that someone would have to find, or £160. So there's a difference of £60 between the two figures. £60 equates to £5 a week, a month, sorry, which could pay for a community food pantry voucher. If you are really struggling, that £5 for your community food pantry voucher could get you enough food to feed your family for the week. So in real terms, for real people's lives, these numbers, although they seem small, are hugely significant to those people. My question is, having made that point, however, is if we were to go for the lower increase, how does that affect the sort of the 30-year plan? I know Councillor Morris was sort of just touching on this, particularly in terms of my concern around the sort of percentage of financing costs against turnover. I mean, how we flex those later figures in the report to allow for, if we were to make a lower increase, the lower increase to the two options.
Yeah, Chair, you can look at figures in so many ways. I did the weekly figure. The weekly figure is £1.53 as the largest single increase for anyone in on a social rent would be £1.53 a week. I would comment that the very significant users of support facilities are those people who receive universal credit, so they won't see that £5 difference through this thing. They won't be losing. The people most impacted by this are those people just above the universal credit level. So that would be important. As far as the impact on business plan, yeah, we have modelled based on the assumptions set out in the paper, and that's where I said that that the impact means the balances that in the business plan effectively reduced by £10 million over the life of the plan. So that's £10 million less to invest in housing services. Was that the question you were asking?
Sorry, it was really about the debt financing costs, the impact as a percentage of the turnover. If we looked at that, so if we have 10 million less, does that then mean that debt financing costs percentage increase go up dramatically or not?
They would increase. I wouldn't say it's a dramatic increase. And as the point I made at the beginning, the plan remains sustainable. We can still finance those debt costs with that lower increase. It's the reduction in the overall investment in housing services and things like retrofitting program and that sort of the biggest impact.
Councillor Power. Thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to get a feel for the impact 50 less units over the life of the plan would have. And of course, the two big variables there are, do we have a handle on how many families are in housing need and what the bedroom requirement is of those houses in housing, those households in housing need? And have we modelled that against the likely provision by registered providers as larger sites are developed and affordable units are provided as part of those major developments? Have we assessed the likely housing need or the likely housing deficit going forward through the life of the plan? Councillor Lerner.
Thank you, Chairman. We currently have around 1,250 households on our housing register, of which 2/3 are requiring a one-bedroom property. So it is very heavily skewed towards smaller properties. I think it's very hard to profile what's going to happen in terms of registered social providers provision, particularly because as we see in a lot of developments, the number of wholly rented units can be quite small. We have significant number of shared ownership properties, and the direction the government is pushing in is very much towards sub-market sale. So homes which are sold at below market rent as being part of that provision as well. Clearly, we want to continue being principally a rented housing provider with a relatively small proportion of what we do being around those kind of shared ownership sub-market offers. So I think planning, particularly over the long horizon going forward, is quite difficult, particularly as we don't know how much government funding there will be in the future through, what was the MHCLGE to provide that difference between making a house, or a home socially rented rather than some kind of sub-market sale.
May I have a supplementary, Chair, if you don't mind? I'm having trouble putting it together in my mind. We know that one-bedroom units are more expensive to develop for the number of beds provided than 3 or 4 market units. We also know that as we use up our own land, the price of all units will increase as we have to actually buy land in order to make provision. And are those 1,700 to be provided over the life of the plan? Have you taken into account the additional cost of needing to actually buy land in order to build, rather than being able to use HRA land as we hold it at the moment?
Chair, I don't know if Mr Johnson is listening online. He may be able to answer your question better than I can give a general answer, but Mr Johnson may be able to pick up on that more specifically.
Mr Johnson, you're unmuted. Welcome to the meeting, Mr Johnson.
Thank you very much. In putting together the plan, we've looked at, myself and the lead officer for new homes, is the mix of new housing going forward. So we've provided funding for 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, affordable and shared ownership based on the likely future demand for these properties. And we've provided the cost of build per square metre for each one, but we haven't obviously provided anything apart from what's already in the business plan for land. And there is 10 million set aside for the purchase of land, but apart from that, we're providing roughly £2,800 per square metre for build costs, and that's the basic assumption on schemes which aren't identified within the plan.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Power?
I think so, Chairman. My concern is that we are looking at justifying an increase of CPI plus 1% based on providing 50 more homes when we only have a waiting list of less than 1,700. So unless we've actually taken a stab at modelling forward that housing need, we are looking to provide something which is unjustified, and I am concerned that we're not justifying that decision with the proposal as it stands. Does that make sense, Chair?
Would you like me to take that as a note for the scrutiny notes?
I would be grateful, Chair.
Okay, just to check, how would you like that put on here? Would you like it put on as you would like them to do that review piece before?
I think I'd like it to be that we should establish some criteria for modelling future housing need before we proceed to uplift by CPI plus 1% in order to justify provision for which we have no established need at present. And can I write that down before? Can it be modified into sensible English before it goes into the notes, please, Chairman?
So I've written down, establish some criteria for modelling future housing need and not just having CPI plus 1 without that justification.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, Chair. I noticed in the report that there was a figure given for the number of houses which are bought under the right to buy scheme every year. And I wondered again in relation to what Councillor Power has said, what impact that has on the overall housing numbers. I seem to recall a figure of 47 in the last year. And again, if I extrapolate that out, that maybe allows for the difference in numbers. But perhaps someone else could advise if that work's been done.
Chair, I may defer again to Mr Johnson. 47 sounds very high to me, so I wouldn't want to say.
Might have been better too, I don't know.
Mr Johnson, please. Welcome back again.
Yes, so we do look at the right to buy, and obviously it's an important source of funding as well as affecting the stock numbers. And the average for the last 10 or 12 years has been roughly 23 disposals a year.
Sorry, can I just ask a follow-up on that? are we seeing a change in pattern over time, Mr. Johnson? Are the number of sales going up? Are they staying steady? You know, I live in a ex-council house. My street is changing quite quickly with more and more houses coming on the market. As prices increase in Winchester, it's one way, as we did, to get on the ladder was to buy an ex-council property. Are such sales increasing?
So it is variable. Sales are increasing at the moment this year, partly because of the freeze on stamp duties and the reduction in stamp duty that's affected demand, I think, to a degree. But over those 12 years, roughly, you're looking at 23 units a year, and that's what we're modelling in the HRA business plan.
Much better than 47.
John's section, no trend upward or down. It's about right.
Should we ask? Sorry, Councillor Lumley's got a follow-up question on that. Is the trend increasing or is it staying steady?
So as I've mentioned, this year it seems to be increasing a little bit. So we're expecting maybe more than 23. But I think in the long term, because the discount goes up by CPI, but obviously the value of the house goes up by the house price index, it becomes more difficult to purchase them. So I think essentially there's two drivers that are affecting sales.
So it's a flat line rather than a rise and a fall.
That's what we're assuming, yes.
Any other questions on this portion of the paper? No, we shall go on to Appendix 1 then, please. So Appendix 1, the HRR business plan assumptions. Do we have any questions on those assumptions? Page 66. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, I know we've made particular effort this year to take a slightly different approach on bad debts and actually have positive conversations with our tenants. So we've worked hard to keep rent arrears and the like down. Given again some of the comments about uncertainty, do we feel that we have the approach that we've taken clearly has worked this year? Is that something we intend to pursue and actually ensure that we manage those difficult circumstances and rent arrears and ultimately bad debts, if that's what comes? Is our strategy more of the same? Thank you.
Councillor Nerney.
Thank you. Yes, taking a slightly different approach to our bad debt situation and approaching people in much more a can we help way rather than where's our money way has been very successful indeed in terms of keeping debts lower than we would have otherwise expected, particularly during the pandemic. It can be quite hard to assess at the moment because we still have an increase in tenants going on to universal credit who do tend to have debts building up for a certain amount of time before we get the chance to start changing the trend. But we have been very encouraged by it, and talking to staff, they've actually also found it a very positive thing for their work, that they do feel that they're helping people rather than it just being about getting in as much money as possible for the council. So it's definitely something that we'll be carrying on doing as it has been such a positive experience.
Thank you.
Any further questions on Appendix 1, Councillor Horrell?
Sorry, Chair, and as you know, sort of into the detail of some of this, but voids have always been one of our positives. We've turned accommodation around really quickly. Obviously, the pandemic hasn't helped on that. Our void number of days increase, but obviously the quicker we can turn accommodation, the better. But also then, if you turn it very quickly, you can't always do perhaps some of the retrofitting that you might want to undertake, particularly as we look to try and improve some of the properties from the climate emergency objectives that we have. So, Chair, could we just clarify what is our approach on voids going forward? Is it more of the same, or are we changing tactics on that? Thank you.
Councillor Manning.
Thank you. As Councillor Hall refers to, while quick turnover is desirable in terms of getting the renting quickly, it isn't always desirable in terms of the quality of the home that we're putting somebody into. We're certainly anticipating that we will have longer void periods as homes become vacant, but that isn't about them taking longer to re-let. That will be about taking the opportunity to do more work to them. And actually, that's not just about the retrofitting, because actually sometimes we are putting people into homes which aren't of the quality that they should really expect in terms of the standard of fittings. And certainly one of the things that we're seeing is that some of our hard to rent properties are just, if you went into them, you wouldn't want to rent them either. And we really need to fix those issues and make sure that we're giving everybody who moves into one of our homes a home that they feel they can be proud of on day one.
Chair, could I just ask a supplementary? It's not necessarily related to the budget, but it is an opportunity just to raise this as we look at the sort of the business plan overall. Is there an opportunity, we did it a few years ago as a complete councillor group, look at how we were fitting out our homes, what the expectations were in kitchens and bathrooms and the like, and our general upkeep. And it is a chance for all of us to participate in what that spec should be, and to understand what those standards are. And again, that has a budget impact in terms of frequency of updates and the quality, maybe the void approach, etc. So just something to note, Chair, perhaps back to the Cabinet member responsible for housing, that is an opportunity, I think, for all of us to review going forward. Probably too late for this budget, but maybe for the future.
Yes, there is actually some provision in this budget for having a look at the void letting standard, and certainly we need to think about the standard of fittings going forward, and as you say, how we treat replacement of kitchens and bathrooms and so on. I think that is one of those issues where we will have to think about the long-term cost of that, as well as just the short-term for this year's budget.
I'd like to ask a question coming on to our discussion earlier about CPI plus one or CPI. So in this appendix, it says the HRA business plan assumptions are that 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25 would do the CPI plus one, and thereafter it would be CPI plus zero. Now, Councillor Learney said once you've skipped a year, it's hard to claw it back, but judging on these assumptions, 25, 26 seems like exactly the opportunity to claw that back. So I just wanted to restate that. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just clarify those rent increase assumptions are in line with the government policy. So the government have already stated that the CPI plus one will be for 5 years, and then revert the national assumption is it reverts back to CPI only after that. So the business plan assumes compliance. So we wouldn't be able in 24, 25 or 25, 26 unless 25, 26 unless the government changed that policy, we would be limited to the maximum CPI only.
Thank you, Mr. Batham. Any other questions on this appendix? No. Appendix 2, we've covered right to buy a little bit. Do we have any other questions on Appendix 2? No. Capital investment and asset base. Okay, Appendix 3, the 8, oh, Councillor Hall.
Chair, thank you. I know the asset plan for housing is being worked on at the moment. And that I think is coming to the policy committee for discussion. Again, I think that's a really important document in terms of our approach to things like disabled adaptations, adaptations, fire safety measures, particularly in our mid-rise blocks, and overall our investment in climate change measures in particular. Just to clarify, is this plan assuming at this point, maybe it's a question for Mr. Johnson, that the draft asset plan as currently constructed is the one that will essentially come to fruition, and therefore these numbers have been built on that basis? Thank you.
Yes, if I could just confirm, the basis of putting the plan together is that essentially the decent homes investment is based on the life cycle replacement cost of bathrooms, kitchens, key components which are identified within the plan, and that this is maintained within Keystone and refreshed every year. So the plan is based on the latest profile of cyclical repairs and maintenance of the stock.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe this is just to follow up, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, does that therefore explain the spike in major works and repairs in year 20 of the plan? It's just a notable spike in that blue line on the graph.
Yes, that's, absolutely. So what that represents is previous investment cycles. So it may well be that there's a number of components which had a certain lifespan which come to an end at that point, and are therefore programmed to be replaced. So it reflects past investment as well as future need.
Any more on Appendix 3? Appendix 4 then. The HRA 30-year plan business plan metrics. Right. Okay, do we have any debates on this paper, please? Councillor Krask.
Thank you, Chair. I recognise the tax support the CPI +1, and I recognise the value of CPI +1 for investment in the whole programme, the sustainability of the programme, improvements in our properties, and very much support that. I think what doesn't sit comfortably with me is why we're doing CPI +1 for all those good reasons and supportive reasons. But then for other charges, for services across the district, we're applying 3%. So residents with their own homes, the homeowners, if they're looking to planning fees to increase the size of the homes, they charge 3%. If a developer is looking at pre-application, they charge 3%. If the homeowner is developing a home and they hire a skip to get rid of the material, it's 3%. So charges are going up 3%, which doesn't seem to fit comfortably with me.
Thank you, Councillor Krask. Councillor Lumby.
Thank you, Chair. I think TACT supported the simple CPI increase, not CPI +1. So they're at the lower of the two options. I think what we meant to say, the exact words didn't come across. Chair, just to be brief in terms of debate, this is just for us to make suggestions to Cabinet for them to consider, and I would make a major plea for, I think, all the reasons given today by people all over the room, that the option of just CPI is considered very carefully, and my strong preference would be that is the right one to go for. I haven't felt there are overwhelming reasons why we have to go +1, and I think given everything, it is right and proper to just go with CPI. Thank you.
Can I just ask the group here, if I make a note that Scrutiny would prefer CPI as opposed to CPI +1, does that represent our views? Because that's what I seem to have heard. That's the first.
I have a reservation, Chairman. I don't think we have demonstrated that we will be providing to meet an established need by going for 3.1 plus 1%. That is my reservation.
So in light of current information in front of us, we would support CPI and not CPI +1.
In the case for CPI.
I can't read.
You can't see the case for CPI +1.
I don't think we have established the case for 3.1 plus 1.
Councillor Ferguson?
I would think in the current climate with COVID and all of the increased demands on council budgets for those on the lowest incomes, if there is room in the budget and we've been told the HMRC is in a good state, then yes, I support that view. Thank you.
So if I've heard it as, in light of the information in front of us today, we would prefer that it was CPI and not CPI +1, as per all of the comments that we've made this evening. I just want to see if I've got a majority in that.
May I help, Chair? I think maybe Councillor Powers is trying to say, in the light of the information presented to Scrutiny this evening, the case has not been made to progress with CPI +1 and would seek Cabinet to consider the matter further.
I would prefer. Thank you.
Okay, I shall make that as a note. Thank you. Do we have any other debates on this paper? Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, we have focused on the rent increase, but there's quite a lot of other good stuff in this paper, which I welcome. I welcome the increased budget for the void renovations. I welcome the increased budget for the effective neighbourhood and estate management. I also welcome the increased budget to allow for 2 more neighbourhood officers. So it's just we haven't commented on them, but there is a lot to recommend in this budget on top of the debate we've had this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Is that it for debate? Councillor Hall.
Chair, thank you, and thank you again to the officers, Mr Johnson joining online, for the effort that goes into producing this budget. I think housing continues to be a very significant part of our delivery as a city council, and a very key part of our work, and almost a jewel in the crown that many authorities would love the opportunities that we have with their own housing stock and the opportunity to build more, as we have demonstrated today. The housing picture, though, is complex. It's not just rents, it is all those other things that other members have also commented on. But I think we should be congratulating the team on the fact that we have a robust business plan, and it is in good shape, and gives us all those opportunities, not only to maintain the homes that we have to decent home standard, to improve them and to build new, and to provide those other services for the communities, not just the homes, but the communities in which people live. I think we should be very positive about this, and I absolutely would be supporting the rent to just be at CPI level very clearly. And I hope Councillor Loney has heard that message from us all this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I have worded it as this, so hopefully we can all support this one. The information before us does not make it a demonstrable case for CPI +1. We would request that this is clearly considered as currently with the economic picture, CPI +0 seems more appropriate. Councillor Power.
I think it is not established, the case for 3 point. I'm not saying it's not there, I just believe it is not established with the evidence before us, and I would like it to be justified so that I can defend that decision in the co-op.
Understood. When I asked for a vote earlier, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was a majority. I just reworded it to include a bit more of your views in it. So, thank you. Any further debate on this? No? Okay, so the recommendation was to comment. We've certainly commented. So with that, we shall move on to item 8 of the agenda, the fees and charges, but not without a 5-minute break. But if we can come back at 9 o'clock, please. Thank you, everybody. So coming on to item 9 on our agenda. Oh, apologies. Item 8. Fees and charges, far more controversial. Coming on to item 8, we're seeing this report before it goes to Cabinet on the 23rd of November. We'll be in asked for our comments on it, and I'll hand over to Councillor Cutler to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think we've, in a way, already introduced this in the discussion and in the budget paper. This paper is obviously producing the detail around the recommendation from the budget paper to increase fees and charges by 3%. We have last year put a lot of work into producing a very comprehensive statement of all our fees and charges to make the paper clearer, and wish to continue that. I think as part of the transparency that paper is always there, shows what all the fees are, even those that we have no control over. So we have discussed already to some extent the reasons why certain fees and charges have not been increased, and happy to take questions on the detail of this paper.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Mr. Botham, did you have anything else to add?
Very briefly, to just pick up on a couple of points. We've had discussion around the inflation rate to use. So we have based the proposals in this paper around September inflation. We could try and